is, her name is Sarah Nowels, and she has been here with us before, but her story is extraordinary and she's quite inspiring. I'm honored to call her my friend. I met her a couple of years ago through fentanyl education, and I'm just thrilled that she's willing to take the time and come talk to you guys about her experiences with fentanyl. Sarah?
Like she said, my name is Sarah, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my fentanyl addiction. So I was addicted to fentanyl from age 17 to about 21 for 3.5 years. But I tend to think that my addiction kind of started earlier than that, around middle school. In the 8th grade, I decided that I would try LSD with my friends. My parents ended up finding out about it and were obviously pretty concerned, so they decided to switch me from the East Valley School District to the West Valley School District in hopes that they could get me away from the kids that I was kind of hanging around, making bad decisions with. And they also put me into therapy because I was struggling with depression and anxiety. It worked for a little bit. I went to West Valley for high school and played sports, kind of kept with a good group. But then towards the end, I quit softball and I got a job at a restaurant kind of close to my house. None of the kids were my age. They were all older, about 21 or 22 years old. And so they liked to go out after work, go drink, have bonfires, have shop parties, all that kind of fun stuff. So because I was around it, I started hanging out with them and gravitating towards them more. And I started smoking every single day, and I would occasionally drink. At the restaurant while I was working and hanging out with these kids, I ended up meeting my now ex-boyfriend there. He showed up to a table, I got his number, I started to end up talking to him, and then we started dating. I was 16 years old, he was 22 years old. My parents were really, really concerned with that relationship, and they were right. I ended up starting to sneak out every single night. He lived a couple blocks away from me, so I would sneak out every single night, go sleep at his house, and at like 4:30 in the morning, I would sneak back in the house and thought that my parents knew nothing of it. They did. With him, I was still smoking every single day, but then I started drinking too. I was hanging out a lot with his friends and then my friends from the restaurant, and I started to use alcohol a lot more. I ended up kind of stopped going to my classes to spend time with him. I kept drinking, and I started to fail classes. During this time, while I was with him, I had been kicked out of my parents' house and ended up living with him. During that, he offered me to try a pill, and I did not know what that pill was. It looked like a Percocet 30, just like the pictures you guys have been seeing. And because I had been struggling with my mental health on and off since middle school, and I had been drinking and smoking, I didn't really think about it. And I said yes. Instantly, I didn't feel the mental pain that I had been feeling for the past 5 to 6 years. I was relaxed, I felt euphoric, and it was probably the best I've ever felt. And it was like a switch flipped in my brain, and I knew that I wanted to feel like that all the time from then on. It started out kind of slow. I was using like 10 pills a day. I was still going to work. I was still interacting with my family and friends. I still wasn't going to school, but I was still trying to keep things on track. 4 months later, in 2020, COVID happened and shut down the world. And because of that, luckily, I was able to graduate high school. During my graduation, we didn't have a big graduation, but I was using during that time, and I specifically remember trying to stay awake and not nodding off during my graduation. I ended up living with my boyfriend full-time, and my use was increasing slowly as the months kind of went on. So now I was using like 20 to 30 pills a day. I experienced withdrawals for the first time in June of 2020 when we decided that, okay, we couldn't keep using fentanyl anymore. And again, it worked for a little bit, but I went back to drinking and smoking, and I was blacking out while drinking quite frequently. In August of 2020, I was back living at my parents' house, and my boyfriend and I were drinking one night, and we went to dinner with my parents, and then we went back home to my parents' house. He ended up buying a pill on the way home, saying that he wasn't going to start using again, it was just this one time. And he ended up scraping less than a quarter of the pill off, and he overdosed. He was in the bathroom. It was a pretty traumatic experience for my whole family. He was up and talking, washing his hands, and then suddenly he was unresponsive, kind of just standing there, and then he collapsed. And he was a lot bigger than me. I probably weighed about 120 pounds at the time, and he was like 6'3", 250. It was really, really hard to get him back onto the bed. I went upstairs and got my parents, and I told them what was happening. In between what words I could get out, I told my dad he's not breathing. My dad woke up my little 16-year-old brother, had him come downstairs, and they started chest compressions on my boyfriend. Paramedics ended up showing up, giving him Narcan, and asked him to go to the hospital. He did not want to go to the hospital. I convinced him to go to the hospital. And before I left, my dad looked at me and said, you have to choose. You either stop using and you stay here, or you continue using and you have to leave. And I chose to leave. From that point forward, we were living in kind of random places, random people's houses, and we ended up staying at his older brother's house. All of his brothers and all of his cousins were also using fentanyl, and so again, my use increased. Now I was using like 50 to 60 pills a day to try and keep up with my habit and to not experience withdrawals. I was still working. I had a couple of different jobs, and during this time, my relationship with my boyfriend started turning abusive, not just physically, but also mentally, and we were starting to be evicted out of his brother's house. So now we went from living in his brother's house to living in a shop or in a car, and so we were homeless. Using put me in a lot of bad positions that I would have never been in to begin with. One specific time that I remember that I still have PTSD from today. We went out to go meet a drug dealer, and we were going to exchange my boyfriend's mechanic services for pills. We ended up working on the car for most of the evening into about 1 a.m. The guy told us that he didn't have pills. So we argued with him for a little bit and realized we were never going to get anything out of him, so we decided to leave. As we were pulling out of the alleyway, two men jumped out of a car, pulled our doors open, pointed guns at us, and asked us where somebody was. We didn't know who they were talking about. I didn't recognize the name, and I was kind of terrified. They took my phone, they took his phone, and then they told us that we owed them $30,000. I was very sure that I was going to die, that they were going to kill me over something that I wasn't even involved in. Suddenly it clicked that they were talking about the drug dealer that just scammed us, and he came out of his house and they shot and killed that man, and I watched that. We left, and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't want to call the police because I felt if I told them what I knew, they would know that I was a drug addict and that it could put me in jeopardy. The next morning, I had to go to my dad's kickoff breakfast to run for sheriff of Spokane County. Every single one of the speakers that spoke at that breakfast talked about that shooting, and I felt like I was going crazy there, listening to everybody talk about this, knowing that I couldn't say anything, and knowing what I had just witnessed. A couple months later, my dad confronted me. He didn't say about what, but he just said, "You have something to tell me." And my brain ran through all of the things that it could possibly be. I thought, this is the moment. He knows that I'm a drug addict. And I thought about a million other things that I had done to my family and all the bad things that I had done. Witnessing a murder did not even cross my mind. Finally, he said, "What about the murder you witnessed?" And I felt relief because he wasn't bringing up that I was a drug addict. And I think about that a lot because my life was so bad that witnessing a murder was so low on my list of issues that I didn't even think about it. My relationship with my boyfriend, again, continued to get worse. My mental health continued to get worse after that. And I was using 150 to about 200 pills a day. I was also having to use cocaine to try and keep up with work because they were starting to catch on that I was a drug addict, and they had pulled me into their office and asked me if I was a drug addict. And I continued to refuse their help and told them that I was not. Because of the cocaine, I was losing a lot of weight. At the beginning of my addiction, I probably weighed about 140 pounds. At this time, I weighed about 94. Over Christmas in 2022, my parents had invited me to a family tradition where we frost cookies at my grandpa's house. And I ended up being so late that by the time I got there, everybody in my family was already done with the party. And when I walked in, I didn't know it at the time, but my aunt saw me and thought I was some random person off the street because of how different I looked since the last time they had seen me. She said I scared her pretty bad. And as I turned around to leave, my parents, again, at the time I didn't know this, but were looking at me and knew that if they didn't do something that I was gonna die. So I went back to the shop. I went with my boyfriend, and around 2 in the morning was the last time I ever used. That morning, I was sleeping on a mattress in the shop, and I remember waking up and I saw my dad at the door. And excuse my language, but the first thought I had was, oh shit, this cannot be good. And I was correct in my assumption. It was not good. And he had reached out to one of his friends and my now boss at Frontier Behavioral Health, and he asked what he should do. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to help me. He just knew that if he didn't try to help me, that I was going to die. So he ended up getting DCRs. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but in the mental health world, DCRs are designated crisis responders. So if you call the crisis line and you feel like harming yourself or harming others, they will send a designated crisis responder out to you, and they have the legal ability to detain you and put you into a mental health facility for 120 hours. So they got there and they sent out a behavioral health unit, a mental health clinician, and a police officer, and they talked to me. I don't remember a lot from this conversation, but my dad says he does, and he said that I told him that I didn't want to do it because it was going to hurt, and I knew it was going to, and I was terrified in that moment. I was also lashing out at everybody. I was yelling at everybody within arm's reach. I was yelling at the police officer. I was yelling at my dad. I was yelling at my boyfriend. I was terrified, and they ended up having enough to detain me against my will for 120 hours. But because it was a holiday and then a weekend right afterwards, those don't count towards your hours, by the way. I ended up having to stay 8 days at Inland Northwest Behavioral Health in Spokane, where I went through very intense withdrawals, and I really don't remember a lot from that time or those 8 days. When I left Inland Northwest Behavioral Health, I immediately tried relapsing. I invited my boyfriend over, and my parents knew. They did not leave our site while he was over. Tried using. My parents were banging on the door. They knew immediately, and so they had to talk with me. And I remember feeling so ashamed at that point because I couldn't figure out why I couldn't stop. Why I kept doing the things that I was doing, and just the pain and the shame and the trauma that I had inflicted on all of my siblings, all of my family, my parents. I knew that I had to be done. I was just exhausted. I knew that I didn't want to go to the hospital anymore. And in Narcotics Anonymous, which is like an AA meeting but for drug users, they tell you that if you don't choose to stay sober, you'll end up in one of 3 places: jails, institutions, or death. And I knew that I didn't want to end up in any of those places. From there, I did decide to get sober. I made the decision that this is not what I wanted to do anymore, and I ended up going to an outpatient treatment and worked really, really hard. I ended up getting rid of the boyfriend that I had had at the time, and things really went well from there. The lady from the mental health organization that had me detained after I got sober kept bothering me, saying that she wanted to give me a job. And so now I work at Frontier Behavioral Health as a peer support specialist, and I work with inmates coming out of prison and help them re-entering back into the community. I see how fentanyl affects them even now. I've had multiple people overdose. Some people are intentionally using fentanyl, but I would say 95% of them are using other substances and are not intending to use fentanyl. I've had some of my clients die. I've also had a bunch of people during active addiction overdose and die, or drug-related deaths. You can't tell with these pills, and they're in everything. Every time that I have one of my people UA at DOC, they'll tell us, yes, I'm using meth or I'm using cocaine, and every single time they always test positive for fentanyl also. I say all this to let you guys know that it's not just saying no to fentanyl, it's also taking a look at the people that you're hanging out with and the decisions you're making from a very young age, all the way up till forever. I strongly believe that the friend groups that I was hanging out with, it made it a lot harder to say no, and I continued to make bad decisions and use drugs. The boyfriend that I had, he's in prison in Idaho until 2037 on a possession charge for fentanyl, and so those are just some of the scary things that can happen, right? I'm in recovery now, obviously, and I've done a lot of work on figuring out my mental health, my sobriety, my trauma, and I've been sober for about 2 years and 9 months, and the reason I like sharing my story is because I was your guys' age when I started using fentanyl. Raise your hand if you're 17 right now. Yeah, I was your age right now. So it is possible. And the other thing is fentanyl, all drugs. It doesn't matter what type of addiction. It can touch anybody. Addiction doesn't care. But specifically fentanyl, we're seeing now more and more. All different ages, all different genders, all different demographics of people. If I would have had somebody tell me that I was going to be a drug addict when I was a kid, I would have looked at them like they're crazy. And I have a specific memory of my dad, who is the sheriff of Spokane County now, teaching in my elementary school about addiction and drug use. And I remember so vividly looking at him while he was teaching and thinking, this can't happen to me, because I have a good family, I have good parents, I make the right decisions. But all it took was one time to use for me to fall into addiction. Thank you guys.
Do you guys have any questions for her? No, she's a lot of info, right?
What was the hardest part about it?
Ooh, that's a really hard question. I think, number one, getting through the withdrawals. I can't even explain to you how physically draining that was. For the first 2 days, I was literally hallucinating. I would wake up out of my sleep, acting out dreams that I was having. I was having hallucinations, I was passing out. Just overall, it was really rough, but I think the hardest part was reaching out for help. I thought nobody cared, and I thought if I told anybody that I was a drug addict, even though literally everybody knew, because I was terrible at hiding it, I thought if I had spoken up, that I would be met with a negative reaction, which was not what had happened at all. It was quite the opposite, actually. Everybody was willing to help and willing to listen to what I was going through.
Anybody else? Now's your chance.
You can ask me anything, I promise I'll answer.
What would you say helps the most, be it family, online things, or helplines?
So I think it's a combination. Number one, the outpatient treatment that I went to was outstanding. They're no longer open, but the way they ran their program was really, really helpful. But I think, again, just support from my family, from community, from the people around me. It took a lot of people to get me happy and sober and better. If I don't know where I would be if my dad didn't have the resource of reaching out to the lady that I'm talking about at the mental health organization. I don't know if I would have ended up where I am. So be good supports to your friends. If you know something, say something. And what I would say is have a trusted adult. If it's not a parent, find somebody. If it's a teacher, if it's a coach, it doesn't matter. Find a trusted adult, build a relationship with them, because it's really important to have an adult that you can trust and who can help you through situations that you might not know how to navigate.
How often were you smoking a pill at your peak?
Well, if I was using like 150 to 200 pills a day, I don't know. It was pretty much all day, every day. Yeah.
How were you able to take 200 pills a day?
Well, I had to do a lot of bad things. I stole money from people, but the boyfriend that I had, his brother owned a tint shop, and so I worked there, and then I also held another job, like a part-time job. So it was just constantly trying to figure out how to make money that day.
When you first started doing drugs, when did you do any drugs, if you did, during work? Because
Yeah, so
did you
I would do them while at work. I would take breaks. I would leave to go to the bathroom. I would, I was constantly using. I used before work. I'd use during work. Use after work. So yeah.
Yeah. How did you take over 200 pills a day without overdosing?
I think I had built up a tolerance. Typically with fentanyl, it is very easy to overdose, and a lot of times people die on their first use, right? Or when they stop using and then use again. But yeah, I built up a tolerance, and there were definitely times where I probably should have and prevented myself from overdosing in some way. I definitely Narcaned myself a few times, feeling like things weren't going good. Same with other people that I interacted with. Yeah. So it actually took me a while. I didn't know it was fentanyl. I thought it was Percocet 30s that I was using, and I didn't realize until the first time I tried to stop and experience withdrawals for the first time. That was kind of the initial time that I realized that I was physically addicted, and it took me a little bit longer to realize that I had a psychological dependence on it too.
Yeah.
A little bit louder, sis.
Sorry. I'm terrible at hearing. It was really rough. It took a long while, and to be honest, I'm still gaining some of it back. But it took months, and it also was a real struggle. Like in the Northwest Behavioral Health, they really didn't help with that, and I didn't eat for like 25 days straight. So then finally, when I did eat, I had to eat in small amounts and kind of gain my weight back until I could actually stomach what I was eating. But yeah, it was kind of a hard process. Yeah.
Was there any moments where you needed immediate attention or
I never asked for immediate attention. A lot of the times, like I said, I had access. I would go to the doctor and let them know I was a drug addict. they would prescribe me Narcan, so that when I left, in case I did overdose, that I had access to that, which is a safe, good practice. And so then when I could feel it's very odd. I could tell when I was overdosing, and could kind of feel things getting a little fuzzy, and also could feel my heart rate slowing way, way down, really, really fast. And I would either ask my boyfriend or whoever I was around to Narcan me, or the other person to Narcan me, or myself to Narcan me. And a lot of the times, I would go right back to using right after Narcanning myself, so. Yeah.
When did you notice the weight loss?
I didn't. I noticed as soon as I got into Inland Northwest Behavioral Health, I actually argued with a nurse at Deaconess Hospital, and she asked me how much I weighed, and I told her 140 pounds, and she looked at me funny, and I said, I weigh 140 pounds, and she said, honey, you don't weigh 140 pounds soaking wet. Finally got into Inland Northwest Behavioral Health, and finally looked at myself in a mirror for like the first time in 4 or 5 months, and had seen what had happened, and yeah, that really terrified me when I saw that. But yeah, I had no idea that had happened. Yeah.
How in the different ways that you were approached did you react, as in like negative responses or positive responses? How is approaching addicted people the best way to do that?
So I think what was really important was that my parents did keep trying. So they would confront me. I would go to their house and in the downstairs bathroom using. They'd be like banging on the door, asking for me to come out, offering help, saying that they'd help me get into rehab. And my parents used to call me, they called me a nickname in active addiction when they would confront me. They called it the monster, because I would scream at them, yell at them, try to do anything to make sure that I didn't have to do that. So I think just the continued support and concern, and being compassionate is the most important piece, and empathetic. Saying that you know how they feel and how hard things are going to be, but that you're not going to abandon them through this process, and that you're going to try to do whatever you can to help them. That was really important for me, because I felt like I would tell them what was happening, if I failed them, they would give up on me, which again is not true. But just reminding them that you're there for them, because they will reach out when they're ready.
What was the scariest part of getting off the drugs?
Oh, literally everything. I was taking my whole life, everything I knew, and completely changing it. So just the whole experience was scary. The withdrawals, figuring out how to get better, figuring out how to navigate a world where I was a drug addict. I don't know. It was just terrifying to figure out how to cope with all the things that I had just kind of done in my life.
Do you have a question?
Oh yeah. Was there like what was like the aftermath like of after taking the drugs, like after getting off the drugs, like did you feel like really anxious, or did you have like any medical problems?
Besides the huge amount of weight that I had lost, I didn't really have any medicals specifically, but more being put on Suboxone, which is a whole other topic for a whole other day, but ended up getting put on Suboxone to help with cravings, and I mean, I still think about drugs every single day to this day, but at the very early stages, it was really bad, where I was consistently thinking about it, like every minute of every day, wanting to go back. So that was kind of the main concern of the aftermath after the withdrawals. Yeah.
Did you have any actual friends who tried to help you quit?
So I was really good at isolating myself and pushing everybody away. Really the only people that consistently kept trying to stay in my life were my parents and my immediate family, my siblings. Other than that, my friends would reach out to me from high school. I wouldn't respond. And they it was actually a very big shock for all of the kids that I went to high school with. I ended up making a social media post about why I had been MIA for the past 3 years, and 99.9% of them had no idea that that had even happened or was going on. Yeah.
So how was your mentality as an addict? Like, did you know what you were doing was wrong and you were like harming people, or did you just like not care and like want to go to the next step?
So both. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I tell people with drug addiction, right? If you know anybody who struggles with addiction, you know that while they're sober, they would never do the things that they're doing while they're in active addiction. I stole thousands of dollars from my little brother, my 16-year-old brother. I would have never done that. I stole $500 to bail my boyfriend out of jail, right? I would have never thought to do these things. And in the moment, I knew that I was wrong, but my addiction was the one driving the bus, pretty much. So it didn't matter, yes, but it also did matter. But anything to be able to use, that was my priority.
Okay, and you guys thank her for coming.